Shana Tova, everybody. I think many are aware that each and every Shabbat since October 7th, I place this flag right here, our flag. And together at the end of each and every service, we conclude by singing. The words of the Jewish national anthem, which begin in that soft whisper, which begin from that vulnerable place within the heart of each and every Jew, and then they well up in passion and in volume and in strength until we get to the musical high point of that poem, and we sing together, Od lo avda tikvateinu, hatikva bat shenot apayim, of 2,000 years. Our hope will not be erased or silenced or drowned out. No amount of threatening encampments, no amount of graffiti sprayed on synagogue walls or threats of violence to Jews, no amount of hostage posters torn down disrespectfully, no amount of missiles fired, none of it, as long as the Jewish heart still beats. O lo avda tikvateinu, our hope will not be erased. We cling to the strength and the faith of our ancestors in their many moments of trial, and the hope that has ensured that we, all of us here this morning, can sit here today and worship in joy and in freedom. We cling to our mission as a people, a beautiful mission, a holy mission, to bring goodness and progress into this world with pride in who we are. We will cling to that strength born of hope, the hope of thousands of years, the hope that light can and must prevail in a world with simply too much darkness. What does it look like? What is Tikvateinu? What does our hope look like for us today? Where does our resilience, where does our unity of purpose, where does our common spirit, where does our pride come from today? How do we walk forward as a people? Following a year and going into another year, it seems, of war, a year where all of us are saying Kaddish. Whether we've lost someone personally or not, Am Yisrael is saying Kaddish this year. A year when innocent hostages at this very moment still are held in tunnels of hell apart from their families. A year where anti-Zionism, where anti-Semitism have come together and spread like a plague across our world. A year where Zionism has become a marker of a pariah status for so many of us among friends and among society. Where does Tikva, where does that hope come from? Where is it born from within the heart of every Jew? How do we find that point of pride? Still, that is our task. Torah, which we read a few moments ago, remarkably tells the story of this moment. Torah speaks on Rosh HaShanah, I mentioned it already, about a family that's broken, about the family of Abraham and the two children that are born to him, one named Isaac and one named Ishmael. They're two beautiful children. They're two innocent children. They're two children who probably looked alike. They're two children who should have been able to flourish together and to grow together, and yet two children, our Torah tells us this morning, who are pulled apart, and a family that's torn apart by the evils of hatred and jealousy and resentment and an inability to move forward, such that we read this morning of that family that's split in two, and we ask ourselves the only question that can be asked: why? How can it be? How can it be that so much potential is lost? It's a question that baffles the mind. that two children who should be able to dwell together in peace and harmony and insist upon their shared hope and their shared similarities and values are trapped in that cycle of pain. That's the story that the Torah told thousands of years ago, and yet we find ourselves still looking at these two brothers and asking why. I'll never forget, for as long as I live, walking up onto this bima on Simchat Torah of last year, our day of joy and rejoicing in all that is good about Jewish life, only to look out at the faces of the congregation and instead of seeing joy, seeing faces of shock and horror because everybody knew what had happened except for me. And the cantor pulled me aside, and I have spent every single day since that day with you and with our Jewish community, witnessing a hatred and realizing a hatred that I don't think any of us was prepared to witness. I don't think any of us knew how deep that hatred truly is. A hatred that we've seen has been embedded so fully in the very fabric of the society that was built there in Gaza that shocks us to the core. The vastness of the tunnel system alone is the biggest public works project ever undertaken in Gaza. There are more miles of terror tunnels there that have been uncovered than the London Underground. That's a remarkable thing to realize. Scary, but remarkable. 310 miles of tunnels whose purpose is to destroy, whose purpose is only to promote hatred. You can't, as a civilized person, I don't think, as a good person, you can't imagine, you can't even fathom billions of dollars poured in from the United States, from Europe, from all over the world, and every penny of it, it seems, used by Hamas not to support, not to build, not to establish a society of progress. It could have been hospitals, it could have been schools, it could have been universities. It was built. No. How hatred stole from all of us and stole from humanity so much possibility, resources used not to build on life, but to worship and to celebrate death. It's easy to lose sight of where God dwells in this world when you think of the scope of that hatred. It's hard to cling to the cord of hope as a Jew, which feels in this moment and throughout the year so very thin, when we know that on October 7th of last year, on Simchat Torah, on our day of joy, so many beautiful young people of all backgrounds, Jewish, non-Jewish, Israeli, American, European, you name it, all of them went to a music festival because they wanted to celebrate peace and togetherness. And they wanted to dance together in that beautiful land, hopeful for a brighter future, to juxtapose that image of those beautiful, innocent children dancing with the dancing of those in Gaza and in the West Bank and throughout the world, sadly, and right here in New York City, celebrating and dancing instead their brutal murder. We've lost an element of hope in this world. Can't be sugar-coated. As the prophet says in our Haftorah, though, Az tismach betula b'machol, our young ones will dance again. They will dance again in our land, that I know. Our Torah tells us something different. Our Torah tells us, B'charta b'chayim. It says choose life, and choose life over death whenever you can. And it's okay to feel angry if you felt angry this year, because that anger is not just an anger toward Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and all the many terrorist organizations that are pointing those missiles right at us and wish they could pull the trigger, and all those who support them. It's an anger not only for what they've done to us, but I think an anger for what they have forced us to do in response, to fight a difficult war that we don't want to fight, that I don't want to fight. We don't want to have to fight. Alan Dershowitz, you know the name. He's way smarter than me. Brilliant. But he put it very succinctly in an interview recently. He said, you want it all to end? You're chanting about ceasefire? You want this conflict to be over? It's very simple, Dershowitz said, and he's a brilliant man. I'll put it to you very simply. Here's the solution. Stop trying to kill us. Just stop trying to kill us. But no, they have forced us to defend ourselves in the context of this complicated war, and every innocent life that's lost in Gaza and in Lebanon, and you might not like me for saying it, but it's true, every innocent life that's lost should break our hearts too as Jews. We think about on Passover how we pour out a little bit of wine when we come to the plagues, right? Because the innocent Egyptians who were killed, that breaks our hearts. We don't rejoice in suffering as Jews. We don't lower ourselves to their level. We avoid it. That's the difference here morally. We don't want this. God forbid. After the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust, though, with an enemy that has sworn to repeat October 7th again and again and again until everybody sitting in this room right now is gone from the earth, because that's what they say. What choice do we have? It was not long after Naftali Imber wrote his beautiful poem, Hatikva, that another visionary, Theodor Herzl, wrote these words about his experience living as a Jew then in Vienna. Little did he know what would happen just a few decades later. He wrote, "In vain we are loyal patriots, in vain do we strive to increase the fame of our native land in science and in art, or her wealth by trade and commerce. In countries we have lived for centuries," Herzl wrote, "we are still denounced as strangers." The Herzl's words sound familiar to you? Maybe not because you've heard the quote, but because you've lived them right here in New York, because you've seen them come alive on your television screen, because you've seen them come alive in your trips into the city or abroad, because you've seen them come alive on college campuses, not just here in New York, but across the country that our children and grandchildren attend. Maybe you've seen how synagogues in our area have been threatened and vandalized this year. Maybe you know that on October 7th of this coming year, just a couple of days, while Jews mourn and say Kaddish and cry for those who have been killed and those who are being held at this very moment, a massive protest is being organized in the city. Flood New York City for Gaza, chanting from the river to the sea. And what they mean on that day when we all cry is that they are planning to reaffirm their mission and reaffirm their desire to eliminate Israel and all that it stands for. Maybe you've seen, or maybe you felt like I have, that in too many ways, living as a Jew in the 2020s here in America has just come to feel a little too much like a return to the 1930s, when the presidents of elite universities, the so-called best and brightest that our nation has to offer, the ones who are the most prestigious, who should have that intellectual clarity and that moral clarity, are struggling to denounce a genocide against the Jewish people on their campuses because it depends on the context of that genocide? Yeah, I think so. We've watched in horror the violent mobs at Columbia and NYU and across the country, where Jewish students have been threatened and harassed and harmed. Their entry to classes has been blocked. They've been protested not just at Israel-themed events, but at Hillel houses and Shabbat services. They have demanded in some cases that Jewish students, just for wearing a kippah, maybe they have a complicated relationship with Israel, but just for wearing a kippah, they have demanded, return to Europe, get off our campus. That's what's going on, guys. Wake up to that. We read on Rosh HaShanah also the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, the near sacrifice of Abraham's beloved son. I say to you right now, it cannot be that sending a Jewish student to high school or to college in 2024 and 2025 is a sacrifice of their emotional well-being, is a sacrifice of their physical safety. It cannot be. And yet we are living in a world where our fellow Americans, where young people, and yes, even Jewish young people, and that's a whole nother subject, are chanting alongside Hamas flags and Hezbollah flags. We've seen them chanting from New York to Gaza, Intifada. You know what the word Intifada means? I know what it means. Because when I walk into the Beit Midrash at the Jewish Theological Seminary, I see who it's in memory of. 2 Jewish students who were there on their year in Israel as seminary students who got onto a bus and never came home. That's what Intifada means. And yet they're chanting Intifada blocks from where those Twin Towers fell, openly supporting terrorism. Where's the outrage? Why isn't that covered in the news? There's a moral clarity and there's a moral fog. And when we live in a society that says to us, from celebrities and politicians and so many, that those who are openly calling from terror just blocks where those towers fell are in the right, and the people defending themselves from terror in a democratic nation are in the wrong, we live in a world of moral fog. We live in an upside-down world, and so it's on us somehow to turn it right side up, to be the light that we have always been, to guide ourselves and, God willing, others too, with a moral compass through this thick fog of hatred. Our ancestors, for thousands of years, have faced what we face today. They have walked as we must walk through the valley of the shadow of death with their intelligence and their creativity and their strength and their faith and their unity of purpose, and they have emerged on the other side, and so too must we. They did it so we can be here today. We are who we are because of them and for them. And it is our mission now to say once more as a people that what we believe in and what we stand for as Jews is too crucial and too beautiful and too holy and too ancient to lose hope, to say again, O lo avda tikvateinu, our hope will not be lost now more than ever. But where do we find it now more than ever? The answer, I think, is very simple. It comes from 2 places, and they're the 2 places it's always come from. It comes from the strength that we draw from our traditions and our God, and it comes, perhaps even more importantly, from one another. We must embrace our Judaism and one another now more than ever, not because we're afraid, but because we are proud. Not because we are afraid, but because we are proud. Way too many people asked me this year, from October 7th to today, Rabbi, I think I'm going to take my mezuzah off the door. What do you think? Rabbi, should my son avoid going to Hillel on a Friday night on his campus? We're a little worried about him. Rabbi, should I tuck in my Jewish star necklace when I go and walk around downtown in the city? Rabbi, should I pretend at a social gathering that I've never been to Israel or that I don't care about Israel? Should I hide my Judaism this year, Rabbi? And to all of those questions, I tell a story. It's a story that was told by the British Rabbi Hugo Gryn about his time and his life as a young boy who was in Auschwitz. He said one winter evening, in the barrack where they were forced to live, his father called him over to explain that it was the first night of Hanukkah there in Auschwitz, time of darkness, in a place of darkness. And yet he watched in amazement as his father plucked just a few threads from the prison uniform to make a wick, and then lit them with melted butter that he had from that day's ration of food, tiny food ration, and began to recite the blessing. And the young son became angry. How could they waste their precious little bit of food with nothing but a tiny little bit of butter just to make a makeshift menorah that looked like nothing, just for a few words mumbled there in Hebrew? To which his father replied to him, "My son, you have seen that it is possible to go a very long time without any food. But Hugo, my boy, a Jew cannot live even for a single moment without finding some blessing, some point of pride in who we are as Jews. I don't care how religious you are. I don't care if you come to shul every night or once a year. I have to remind you this year as your rabbi that we as a people have held strongly to the traditions and to the values which ground us in our spirituality and in our history and in our story and in our ancestors and in our God. And the day that you turn away from that out of fear or shame is the day that they win and we lose. Just like Jonah in the Yom Kippur reading, who stands on a ship in the midst of a terrifying storm and declares, Ani Yehudi, I am a Jew. Our strength comes from the ways that we boldly and proudly display our Judaism this year in the midst of this ongoing storm. Our strength comes from tradition, and our strength comes from one another. Life in Israel today is very, very difficult in ways that I think are impossible for Americans to truly understand. There are now thousands, tens of thousands of people displaced in the north. It's hard for any of us to imagine what that's like unless you've lived it. It's hard for any of us to imagine what it's like to wake up to the sounds of a rocket siren and not an alarm clock. It's hard for any of us to fully realize what it's like to live in a perpetual state of Shiva, because everyone knows somebody who's been killed or is being held. It's hard for any of us to know, and as a new parent, it's very hard for me to imagine what it's like to turn to your 18-year-old daughter or son and say, I wish you strength, and I wish you protection, and I hope that God will protect you as you go and defend our way of life and our people in our Jewish state. How do they go on? How do they make it day in and day out with so much uncertainty and so much trauma? Our strength comes from one another, and the way in which we lean on one another, the commitments we feel as Jews toward our community, and those in our community, maybe who we don't even know or don't even like, but we should have that sense of Ahavat Yisrael, of a love for one another, especially now. It doesn't come from the Mossad, our secret weapon. It comes from each other, the cord of hope that tethers us to our destiny, that cord that we cling to together when we need it most. Nobody understands the pain of this moment, and nobody understands the strength of our people and the strength of lifting and holding each other up right now more than one person. It's the mother of slain hostage, Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who we know was murdered in cold blood after hundreds of days of clinging to life and clinging to hope. When I think about the strength of Israeli society, when I think about the strength of the Jewish people, when I think about the strength of the Jewish spirit, I think of his mother, Rachel Goldberg Poland. You have to understand how almost unbelievable it is that in the Haftarah for this very morning, for those who were paying attention, we read about Rachel, not Rachel Goldberg Poland, but a Rachel who lived thousands of years earlier. And the text for this very morning, it said, Rachel mevaka al banecha, that Rachel wept for her children who had been taken from her land. Gives you chills. But if you read on in the Haftarah, it says this very morning, V'yesh tikva le'acharitech, that there will be some hope found somewhere at the end of all of this. It's almost impossible to hear those words in the Hebrew without crying this year, and to know of the children and the parents and the siblings who have not returned to their families for Rosh Hashanah. Our Rachel Goldberg, Poland, all of the hostage families, including the Nutra family who live just a few minutes down the road in Plainview, they know what it means to cling desperately to a cord of hope, and in too many cases to find that cord broken as their hearts and our hearts continue to break for them. Nobody would be more justified in giving up, in giving in to despair, in rejecting God, in rejecting community, in rejecting one another, in rejecting life. But listen to what Rachel Goldberg Poland said in her eulogy to her son, her beautiful son. They are to me among the most important words that were spoken in the midst of the storm and darkness of this year, the words of a loving Jewish mother. She said, Hirsch, like most parents, Dada and I would often talk about who you would become, what you would be like when you grew up, what you would do, what you would look like, what kind of parent you would be, but now you will be forever our beautiful boy. You will stay energetic and kind and patient and curious and funny, forever handsome, forever young, forever my sweet boy. And then she wrote, as we transform our hope into grief and this new unknown pain, I beg of you, please, Hirsch, do what you can to have your light shine down upon me and Dada and Libby and Orly. Help shower us with healing and resilience. Help us to rise again. Help us to hear laughter and turn around and see that it's us and that we are okay. You will always be with us as a force of love and vitality. You will become our superpower. And then she concludes that she wanted to say in the most sincere and heartfelt way, thank you to the countless people in the extended community who have held us, cared for us, prayed for us, cooked for us, carried us when we could not stand up. I'm told that you couldn't enter that Shiva house because there were thousands of people there. I'm so thankful to you, she wrote. And I apologize deeply because we will need continued help to get through this sickening new chapter too. I'm sorry to ask because we have given you nothing and you have already given so profoundly and completely. But she ends, I beg of you now, please don't leave us. We cannot leave each other now. We need each other now. We need Jewish community now. More than we ever have. Rachel Goldberg Poland, who lost her world and yet has begun to find a way somehow to walk forward through the valley of the shadow of death. We must walk with her and we must walk forward together with strength that is found in one another in 5784 and now in 5785. If there is anything to be hopeful about, it is the beautiful and powerful way that Jewish community across the country and right here at TBT have stood arm in arm, not only through donations and through our services and through our commitments, but through our declaration that whatever we face in this year, O lo avda Tikvateinu, our hope will not be erased. And Am Yisrael Chai, that you may tear us down again and again and again, but the people of Israel yet live. It was over 150 years that the words of Hatikva were first written. Written, you may not know, in a pogrom, written in the face of death, written with a dream of an escape from millennia of exile and persecution to an ancient homeland. They were written without knowing the fact that just a few years later, an agricultural school near Jaffa in what was then an uninhabitable desert would begin to take shape, and that place would be named Mikveh Yisrael, the hope of Israel, and that uninhabitable desert would somehow begin to blossom and bloom with life, and it was nothing short of a miracle that the word tikva, that the word hope, would be transformed by the Jewish people from a noun into a verb. That is who we are. It's only us, with all our history and all that we have faced, that could have the audacity to sing, O lo avda tikvateinu, our hope will not be lost, and really mean it, and really live it, and cling to it, and to act upon it. It's the reason so many others have come and gone, and yet we are here today, all of us, living proof in the power of those words that Imber wrote in 1879, the strength of the Jewish people to cling to all that is good and holy. It is almost impossible to fathom, and yet here we are. Will there be a day when the hatred for Yishmael toward Isaac subsides, and a human family may dwell together with shalom bait, with a peace in the home, different but together? Will there be a day when finally that love is rekindled? Powerfully, our Torah tells us that they did reconcile in the story. When? They come together at Avraham's funeral. They reunite and reconcile in that moment of grief. And maybe, just maybe, there will be a time when the violence and the loss just become too much, and the hatred for the Jewish people gives way to a love and a devotion and a commitment to shared progress for all. Our hope in that dream, I think, sadly, remains a little far off. But our belief in the beauty, in the holiness, in the strength of who we are, our belief in our need to stand together, our ability to stand together, that is always with us, and it will carry us into this year, I assure you. Optimism is believing that life will get better. Hope is making sure that it does. And we have a lot of work to do, guys. But hope, it's a cord that binds us together. And like a cord with one tiny strand, it's weak. But with many, that cord can hold anything. We will stand together this year. We will walk through this valley of the shadow of death. And when the morning has come and it has gone, we will celebrate together as we always have. We will pray together as we always have. We will laugh together. The children of Israel will dance together again. And most importantly, we will, wherever we are, I hope, as long as the Jewish heart still beats within us, sing the words that define who we are, words which have carried us so very far to this moment, words which are our strength and our eternal and undying hope. Sing with me now, please, everyone, as we rise.
O Lord, balevav penima, nefesh Yehudi omia, ulfate mizrach kanima, ayin lezion Sophia. O love Tikvateinu, Hatikva bat shnot alpayim, lihyot am chofshi be'artzeinu, eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim, lihyot am chofshi בארצנו ארץ ציון וירושלים.
Tova, everybody.